Hi, I'm Joshua Curving, and welcome to another Death Battle prediction video. But first, Samurai Jack versus Afro Samurai. This one really didn't surprise very many people. It was pretty much like a stat stomp in almost every regard, and as I had said in my prediction for it, I would have wanted to have looked closer at the Afro Samurai speed feat that people were saying was like higher than Jack's. Because ultimately, yeah, it does come down to the fact that people overestimated it, and it only did come out to being like 20-something% the speed of light, which Jack completely stomps on. And then strength was no comparison, and just everything that that Samurai Jack had was way better, and they had to gimp Samurai Jack and didn't give him any of his extra equipment. Things like Scaramouche's dagger would have immediately won the fight because just, oh hey, Afro now no longer has a sword. And then I've seen some people saying that like Afro should have been stronger because they mentioned the tensile strength of steel being higher than whatever they said Jack's strength feat was. Which one? It's not even Jack's best feat. Two, that's the tensile strength. That's not like, if you break something, that it's not like you're lifting that exact amount. There's a lot more math that goes into it. That was more one of the things that they do to kind of trick you into thinking that one character might have the advantage before they pull out the rug from underneath you and you realize, oh, the character had absolutely no advantage in that fight. That said, the commentary was actually really funny. I really liked how they were kind of going through the names of Afro Samurai. That was pretty fun. And the animation was pretty stellar, actually. When we first saw some of the hand-drawn animation, during that one shot of it where like the two of them like turned around and cut at each other, it looked kind of like, what's the word for it? It looked a little bit too cartoony in like a chibi-ish sense, and I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out. But for the rest of the fight, it was stellar. Like, a lot of the facial animations for Jack were spot on to how the series portrayed him. The only complaint I have is there's no way Afro would actually be able to cut off Jack's arm. What are you talking about? I know the animation isn't indicative of the actual fight, so whatever. But ultimately, it was a great fight and a great animation. And then we get announced Carnage versus Lucy. This is one of those fights where if anyone isn't really like an anime fan, they have no idea who Lucy is. But more or less most anime fans look at this and go, oh Jesus Christ, that one. Elfen Lied is not for the faint of heart. They said that before talking about Guts. Elfen Lied is probably worse than Berserk in regards to gore, nudity, and crazy shit going on. But this fight is kind of interesting because there's not too much of a theme. Both of them are just kind of crazy serial killers, I guess. And can have long-range, like, limb-like projectiles. There's not too much linking them together, actually. But it is kind of an interesting fight. There has been a lot of debate about it, largely stemming down to quite a few disagreements about how things are going to work. One of the important things to keep in mind with this one is it is a Marvel fight, which 90% of the time I'm really not a fan of. And this is kind of one of those cases as well, because Carnage himself doesn't have a ton of feats. It's more that he scales to other people who have done those feats, such as the fact that he took both Venom and Spider-Man fighting him to actually take down, and only temporarily, even that. One of the biggest factors for Carnage is his absurd regenerative abilities, which have survived him being torn in half by Sentry, who is like Marvel's Superman. even though, admittedly, Sentry did it very casually, and it took Carnage a long time to regenerate from, which is very uncharacteristic of him. Usually it's almost immediate. And then you have other feats like taking hits from Hulk, and he basically just like gets splattered and gets back up. Which means that his durability isn't as much of a factor as it is the regen. His attack potency is also decent, but honestly it's not that high in comparison to a lot of other characters. It's kind of in a similar place to Spider-Man and Venom. And then you have speed, which is kind of like where a lot of the argument is for Carnage winning. So basically, the speed debate in regards to Carnage is that Spider-Man has a few like feats that are measured in like nanoseconds or something like that, and it basically ends up being this like Mach, I think it's like 7,000 or something like that, feat that scales everywhere in Marvel. This is kind of my problem with Marvel fights, is that because everyone has fought everyone, there's kind of like this big scaling circle of everyone is this strong. I tend to not like that as much, because just how scattered those comics are, it can sometimes lead to some very weird situations. And so ultimately, we have that. And then for capabilities, the most important ones are Carnage's possession, his regen, as I mentioned before. The fact that he can like get into people's bloodstreams and like start controlling them and messing with their minds. Admittedly, I don't think messing with the mind is going to do much to Lucy. She's already pretty psychotic as it is. There is also, just in general, he can turn his body into various weapons and projectiles. And then the last one is that he has a spider sense, not the spider sense, not exactly like Peter's spider sense, but it is his own version. And the capabilities of that spider sense are that he can see from anywhere of his symbiote. That will come in. That will come up later, because there's a couple debates that have been going on with this fight. That's one of the trigger points of the argument I'm going to bring up later. Okay, so now we have Lucy. Lucy's big thing is that she has vectors. They are these invisible, intangible arms that can grab onto things, rip things apart. She can separate things from the blood cells, apparently, which is one of the things that she was doing in the manga when she was basically saving someone. So that could come up later. I don't think it'll be super relevant, though. These vectors, so what they can do is, in the anime, I think she caps out at like 4 or 5 vectors, but in the manga she caps out at, I think, 28. These vectors as well can change in size and exact shape, to the point where at the very end of the manga, they were long enough to cover the entirety of the United States, lengthwise. And then they were thick enough to cover about a state. So if she were to take like all 28 of them and just put them in a line across, she would cover almost the entirety of the United States with just that alone. She's also capable of like phasing into people, taking out like hearts and things. And the vectors are able to basically block whatever. They have like tons of feats and such. They can smash through like buildings. And then her speed, there was a calculation someone did where her vectors reached into space, and it took like a certain amount of time. The feat came out to about Mach 1,500, I believe, which means that, yes, she is significantly slower than Carnage. That is another big thing with the debate. And so she is slower, but she's also significantly stronger with her vectors. Though her body itself doesn't actually have all that many durability feats. She tends to take damage from things like bullets. So without her vectors, she's kind of screwed in that regard. So the debate does come down to whether her vectors can stall out Carnage. Oh, actually, there was one thing I forgot to mention. Another capability of the vectors is that for a moment they will go visible, and then they will detonate. The special thing with this detonation is it was stated in the manga to release, I believe it was electrons, I think. And they basically compared it to, it basically made a nuclear blast. And that was with, like, the small vectors before she went crazy and went into her, like, super form that makes her literally melt. So ultimately, like, you can kind of use two abilities together, and if she uses that explosion while she's in her super form, that'll be a hell of a blast. So there we have kind of like the baseline for both characters. Where the debate lies is that a lot of people are saying that Carnage would speed blitz. A counter argument to that would be that Carnage never does. That's not his personality. He always toys with people. He will always let them get hits in. It's just how he is. Well, the other argument is that Lucy will be able to overtax his regen, which she probably can't without a specific circumstance. In regards to the regen, it has regenerated from things like Sentry. Lucy is not strong enough to overtax that with just like her normal vector attacks. So it kind of comes into this like stalemate situation where if he gets around the vectors, he actually has a good shot at winning Carnage. So this is actually one that I've kind of like gone back and forth on because the vectors are invisible, and one big thing, I mentioned this would come up later, but the vectors are invisible and intangible. Can they be detected by Carnage? There are a few people in Elfenlied who manage to actually see them, and Carnage would not be able to see them. The people who saw them, I think one of them was Bondo, I think his name was. He was like a mercenary who was sent after Lucy, and then when she gouged out his eyes, he had eyes like specifically made to be able to see them. Carnage does not have that. But then you would bring up the spider sense. And again, it's not Peter Parker's spider sense. There is a chance that his would be able to detect the vectors. Carnage's does nothing similar to it. It would not be able to. So that kind of puts that debate to rest a bit. But the Speed Blitz is still very much a viable option in terms of if he eventually went for it, he would probably be able to kill her. But one of the things that stops this argument is that if Lucy just gets her vectors going huge, Carnage is not going to be able to navigate that. Even with his speed advantage, he's not going to know where the vectors are. He's not going to be able to maneuver around them, because it's basically going to be like trying to navigate through an invisible maze. There's 28 of the things, and she can make them the size of like a country. There's nothing that Carnage is really going to be able to do to close that gap as easily. And this kind of brings us to Carnage's biggest weakness, which is fire and heat. One of the things with a lot of the symbiotes is that their sonic resistance is very low, but ever since he came into contact with a certain item, I think it was like the Darkhold or something like that, he was able to resist sonic attacks extremely well, but he still has a weakness to heat and fire, just like Venom. He has taken attacks from someone like, I think Sunstar was his name, who has like an island level fire feat, and Carnage did take an attack from him. That said, I do think it is possible that Lucy can eradicate Carnage by basically nuking the hell out of him. Nukes release a ton of heat, and because her vector explosions were compared to a nuclear bomb, it stands to reason that that would be her only attack that is actually capable of killing this guy. Especially if she does lay down all of her vectors at full power and just blast him. There's nothing he can really do about that. I think that that would absolutely be capable of wiping out every bit of him, and so he wouldn't be able to come back from it. This is ultimately a pretty close fight. It comes down to what you think would happen in terms of who would start trying hardest first. And I do think Lucy would start trying harder first, and she would ultimately use her winning moves before Carnage would. That said, if Carnage does get in close, Lucy's pretty much dead. His damage capacity is higher than her durability. He can do his possession, which I've seen some arguments about that Lucy could potentially resist it because she managed to temporarily resist the DNA voice that basically told her to kill things. So there is an argument there as well, but ultimately I don't think Carnage would really need to. There's also the argument that she could potentially separate Cletus and the symbiote from each other using her cellular manipulation. I don't think that would ultimately be very important because, yes, she would then be able to kill Cletus, but she would have the exact same situation as before when she would be trying to kill the symbiote even after she did separate them. So I think it isn't that important in the long run. I think it more or less does come down to the fact that if she nukes his ass, he's dead. So that's who I'm going to lean towards for this one. What we've seen of the fight is really good, and we've seen a really long chunk of the fight. Like, did they show us 70% of the fight at RTX? I can't imagine they would show that much, but maybe that means that it's a really long fight. That also said, with RTX, I'm not really all that excited for the next two fights after this. We know what they are. I'm going to do a prediction for the next one. I'm probably not going to do a prediction for the one after it, episode 99. I'll probably give more details as to exactly what my issues are in the next prediction video, because this one's already running a bit long because there was a lot to talk about. Well, the next one, it doesn't have anything to talk about, unfortunately. So I will see you guys with that one, and let's hope there's a very good death battle. Alright, see you guys later.